Now let's discuss backing. So, what is a fair backing deal? Well, it depends. First, what is your return on investment? If your return on investment is high, you can get a better deal than if your return on investment is low. What about if your return on investment is negative? Well, what happens then? Next, how badly do you need to sell the action? If you're going to play the tournament anyway and it's not a big strain on your bankroll, maybe you don't really need to sell the action. What if you would not play the tournament otherwise and you really want to play the tournament for some reason? Well, now you need to sell the action. Also, do you care if the backer has a profitable purchase, a profitable proposition? If you don't care about your backers and you say, screw them, I don't care if they make bad deals, well, that will lead to different results than if you do care about your backers and you want to be backed long term. So we're going to be discussing two backing deals, one that has markup and one that has makeup. Similar words, but very different. A markup is when you are making a one-time purchase of equity in a tournament. This does not impact future tournaments or past tournaments or anything like that. You're making a one-time deal. Markup is the premium that is added to the buy-in that the backer has to pay to get a piece of the action, which usually is based on the backee's skill level. So markup is usually displayed as the buy-in plus some additional amount. For example, if you're buying at 1.5, that means that if a tournament's buy-in is $1,000, the backer has to pay 1.5 times that amount to get a piece of the action. So if they want to buy, let's say 10%, 10% of 1,000 is 100. 100 times 1.5 is 150. So to get 10% of that player's action, you have to pay $150. So then, let's say we make that deal. If the backee, the person playing the tournament, cashes, the backer gets 10% of whatever that cash amount is. So if the backee cashes for $138 because they pay out a lot of the field, for $1,380, then the backer would get $138 for a little bit of a loss. If the backee cashes for $10,000, the backer would get 10% of that, which would be $1,000. Very, very nice and easy. You're paying some amount of a premium because of the player's skill level, and then you get whatever percentage of that player's cash that you buy. Let's take a look at a few examples. If the backee is selling at 1.0, also called even money, in this scenario, 10% of a $1,000 tournament would cost $1,000. Very, very clean and easy, and very, very obvious, right? Basically, if I'm playing a $10,000 game and you want 5%, costs you 5% of 10,000, which would be $500. What about 1.2? Well, now 10% of a $1,000 tournament costs $120. And it's important to think about what happens if the backee sells a lot of the tournament. Well, if the backee sells 83% of their action here, they're actually completely free rolling the tournament. Now they get to keep 17% of whatever they cash for, despite putting in $0 of the money, which is not such a bad deal for the backee. What about if they sell at 1.5? Well, now the backee can free roll if they sell 67% of the action. And if they sell at 2.0, which is very, very high, the backee can free roll by selling 50% of their action, which makes sense, right? If I sell $500 worth of a $1,000 tournament and you pay me twice that amount, that's $1,000. So you're giving me the whole buy-in and you get half the money. So, also, what is your return on investment? This is sometimes hard to assess for any individual tournament, but if you're a good player and you have a lot of data, you can estimate it. So, always ask, what is your skill level relative to the other players in the tournament? If your opponent's really bad, your ROI is going to be high. If your opponent's really good, your ROI is going to be low. What is the structure of the event? If you're playing a turbo tournament that's going to take 6 hours, well, then you're going to have a low ROI. But if you're playing a 5-day tournament, your ROI could potentially be higher. How much is the rake? That definitely impacts how much you're going to win. What is your historic ROI in similar events? So let's say you're playing a $1,000 tournament and you've played $1,000 tournaments, and you know over those $1,000 tournaments, your return on investment is 40%. It's probably pretty accurate. Now, it may actually be 20% or 60%, but 40 seems like a reasonable estimation, and you have a lot of data to prove that or make the case for that. Also, if you don't have a big sample, you want to ask what the ROI of comparable players to you is in similar events. So you'll find that some players just run kind of bad, especially in live poker over an extended period of time. Like, 5 years. It's very easy to just lose every tournament you play for 5 years. It happens. You won't actually lose every tournament, but you may not win very often. Let's say every time you get to 5th place, which may happen twice a year, you just lose the flip. Yeah, well, you're going to have bad results. So that could be the case. Also, you could run super hot. So if you have, let's say, 500% ROI, but you know that's just absurd, then you clearly must be running hot. For example, in World Poker Tour events, I have about 500% ROI, which is stupid. It's stupidly high, but it's purely based on just running hot towards the end. And I realize that is not my actual ROI in these tournaments. It's probably more like 100%. I've just been very fortunate to win a few big ones at exactly the right time. Alternatively, my return on investment in World Series of Poker events is just like barely profitable, like 5% ROI, because I have not ran particularly well at the end. That doesn't mean that I'm not good in World Series of Poker events, but good in World Poker Tour events. It just means that's how variance has fallen, and you can't really do a whole lot about that. So you want to look at the ROI of your friends who play equally as well as you. You look at other players who you think play about as good as you and see what their ROIs are. And that will give you a rough idea. So general concerns, online tournaments will have lower potential ROI than live tournaments. Also, turbo tournaments have faster structure, so lower return on investments there. The high rake will just wreck your ROI. Events with a lot of satellite qualifiers are typically softer, and that leads to higher potential return on investments. And also, buying in late will lower your potential return on investment. Sometimes if you're going to buy multiple bullets of a player, if they're going to be buying into, let's say, a $1,000 buy-in tournament and they're willing to play 3 times, the right way to go about that is to sell second and third bullets at a cheaper rate. So let's say they want to sell their first bullet at 1.3, the second bullet may be 1.2, third bullet may be 1.1. Just hypothetical. It should probably realistically be lower for the last one. But that's because you are taking into account the fact that the structure of the tournament is effectively worse, because when you buy in late, you have fewer chips. All right, just to give you a few return on investment examples, in a $10,000 buy-in, super slow structured World Series of Poker main event, which happens one time a year, a very rare tournament, the return on investment of the best player in that event may be something like 300%. It's very, very high. In a $1,500 World Series of Poker event, the best player in the field may have something like 100%. In a $1,000 Turbo World Series of Poker event, the ROI of the best player may be 50%. And in a generic $200 nightly tournament at your casino, the ROI of the best player may be something like 30%. And when I say the best player, I mean the literal best player in the entire field, which almost certainly is not you and very often is not me. And it's important to recognize that. Like, I don't think I have 300% ROI in the World Series of Poker main event. It's probably more like, I don't know, if you put me on the spot, 150%, something like that if I had to guess. And it's important to realize you are not the best player. These numbers I'm giving you are generally thought to be very, very high numbers. In online high-stakes tournaments, 20 to 30% is thought to be very, very good. In the small-stakes online tournaments, something like 50% is thought to be pretty good. Okay, so now, how badly do you need or want to sell action? Obviously, you don't have to play any tournaments. I don't think there's a tournament happening this week, so I have to play it. No, don't think like that. However, if you want to sell action, you want to ask, do I really need to sell it or not really? If you don't need to sell the action because you're going to play the tournament anyway, then you can sell at a higher markup, which will decrease the demand of people wanting to buy that markup. So if I only want to sell 10% of a tournament, and I'm happy, only selling a little bit, if I find it's not hard to find one person to buy the markup or buy the action at a relatively high markup. If you really need to sell the action though, because perhaps you don't have enough cash on you to play the tournament, or perhaps it's just higher than you want to play. Let's say you need to sell 50% of the action if you're going to play the tournament. Well, now you have to sell at a lower markup to increase the demand of people who are willing to buy it. Also, if you're selling a lot of dollars worth of action, that's usually going to require a lot of buyers. Like, let's say I want to go play a $100,000 buy-in tournament. There aren't a whole lot of buyers who want to plop down, $50,000 to buy half my action. So you're going to have to do a little bit of legwork and sell at a lower markup. Also, if someone is willing to buy a lot of your action, like let's say all of it for an extended period of time, like let's say they're going to buy every or buy all the action you want to sell, let's say 50% of every tournament you play for the next month at 1.2 markup, it's probably fine to give that person a bit of a deal because they're going to make your life way easier because you only have to deal with one person and you don't have to run around trying to collect money from people, et cetera, et cetera. You just have that available to you and it's much easier. So if someone's going to make your life easier, you should usually give them a bit of a deal. Next, do you care if the backer has a profitable buy? Well, I think you should. And the reason I think you should is because if they rarely or almost never win, they're going to stop buying. That said, some people do not mind fleecing their supporters. This has happened a few times in the the poker influencer space. There have been YouTube vloggers who are selling for the World Series main event at like 2.0, which is absurdly high. And often these players don't even have good tournament results. They're essentially saying, I don't care about my backers. I'm going to make them pay me a lot of money just to get a sweat because they like me. But in reality, they are fleecing their supporters. And I think that is quite unethical. You see, some things, ethics are funny, right? Like I have no problem making a deal like we discussed in the previous video with people that is very bad for them. But I have a huge problem with crushing my supporters because I guess I don't view business as me trying to extract maximum value from people or maximum dollars from people. I view business as add a lot of value to people and then they will reward you. And I think you're going to find that making deals that screw the backer do not work out for you well at all long term. They make you look bad. They give you sure like a bad persona in the poker world, and you do not want that because at the end of the day, your reputation is all you have in the poker world. And if you squander that by just like taking advantage of people who are willing to invest in you, it's not going to work out. So a simple way to give a fair deal is to just give the backer half of your perceived profit. Okay, so what I mean by this is if you expect to have 100% return on investment in some tournament, your actual value when you buy in is 2.0, right? So you're putting in the 1, right? So the difference here of the 100% return on investment profit is 50%. So you should probably sell at 1.5. If you expect to have a 50% return on investment, you should probably sell at 1.25. And if you expect to have a 10% return on investment, you should sell at 1.05. And you see that it's not, I always sell at 1.2. It's what do I think my perceived edge is in this tournament? And then you give the backer half of that. Now, again, if you don't mind fleecing your supporters, if you think you have a 50% ROI, sell at 1.5. They're just going to break even out the door, and then, you're making all the money. Alternatively, you can sell at 1.7, sell at 2.8. Who cares, right? If you don't care about your supporters, sell at whatever you want. But like I said, that is not a good way to go about this, and that is quite predatory in a situation that I don't think you need to be predatory in. So let's talk about some bad deals for backers. In the past, it was very common for someone to just straight buy someone into an event and give them 50% of their action in exchange for playing the tournament and for utilizing their skill, which we've already learned is the same as them selling at 2.0. Well, this is an incredibly bad deal for the backer because most fair deals for most people are somewhere between 0.7, buying at an actual discount, and about 1.3. That's going to be the spread for most players in basically all tournaments. So if you're paying 2.0 for someone, you are just going to get slaughtered. Action of losing players, which, hate to break it to you, are most people who really need to sell action because they have no money. If you have no money, it presumes you're not very good at poker. The action of losing players should actually be bought at a discount at like 0.7 or 0.8, which implies I think you're losing money. But that essentially never happens in the real world. Very few people are going around saying, I'm happy to sell myself at a disadvantage and put in more money than I should to play a tournament. It just doesn't happen. Also, one-time backing deals should completely ignore expenses. Some people will say, oh, you should pay me 1.8 because I have to pay for the hotel room. Well, it's your choice to go out there and play the tournament. And your backer for a one-time deal should not deal with your expenses. Also, if you're a backer, ideally, you want the backee to have a lot of their action. You do not want people going around free rolling, right? We listed the free roll numbers earlier. You do not want them free rolling the tournaments because then you'll find that if people don't really have skin in the game. If they're not actually paying money and risking their own money to play, they're going to be a little bit more inclined to goof off. And you do not want people goofing off. And also, you want to make sure the backer is a reasonable human. You want them to have no track record of scamming people in the community. And you ideally want to just know they're going to pay you. You want to know they're going to play well, et cetera, et cetera. One summer during the World Series of Poker, I decided I'm going to make all the money and I'm going to back about 100 people in all sorts of tournaments. So I did it. Every day I would show up at the Starbucks at the Rio and I would just hand out envelopes of money to people. And at the end of the summer, we ended up winning money. However, a few bad things happened. A few people did very poorly that summer, which is going to happen. Some people are going to do poorly. But it turns out most of those people who did poorly were also posting on Twitter about how they were out at the club at 3 a.m. every day before they were supposed to be playing poker. Those are probably not good people to back. I could have done better research ahead of time to make sure these people are going to go to bed at 10 p.m. and play poker responsibly and whatnot. Those are clearly horrible buys, and I just lit that money on fire. Someone else, I bought like $10,000 worth of their action, and they cashed for an amount for me that was like $400. Not a lot, but when I went to go collect my $400, the guy said to me, "Screw you, Jonathan Little, you're rich, I'm not paying you anything." Clearly not a good person to buy from, right? So you want to make sure that you are buying from people who have a good track record in the community. And to be fair, like, I didn't know that person had a bad track record in the community, but turns out they'd scammed a bunch of people. Some people are known to be scammers, and you want to make sure you do not deal with scammers. And if you have a group of poker friends, ask them, do you have any bad knowledge about these people you're looking to get in business with? And it turns out word gets around quickly and you'll learn. All right, so those are all bad deals for backers when it comes to markup. Let's talk about makeup now. Makeup is a long-term deal where someone buys all of your action, 100% of it, for some amount of time, which is usually until you're either up with the money they've invested in you, or they want to cut you off. They no longer want to back you because they think you're no longer a winning player and they're basically giving up on you. So in a makeup deal, it's common for it to be split 50-50 after all losses are repaid. And that's a very important difference between markup and makeup. A markup deal is a one-time purchase. A makeup deal is a long experience. So, as an example, if you are down $10,000 in a makeup deal and you win a tournament for $15,000, what would happen is the backer gets repaid their $10,000 that you were down, and now you get 50% of $5,000, which is $2,500. You may say, if I cash for $15,000, I only get $2,500. That's not fair. Well, realize the backer was down. They have to be made whole and even before you split the profits. And then at this point, you're up $2,500 that you cash out. Your backer cashes out that $2,500, and now you're even. At that point, you can quit. If you want to go on your own and play on your own money or look for a different deal, whatever, it is perfectly fine to do that at that point. Let's say instead you're down $10,000 and you cash for $8,000. Well, now you get nothing. Why? Well, because the backer still is owed $2,000 back. So you're still in $2,000. And at this point, you are down and you cannot quit at this point. And you may say, what do you mean I can't quit? That sounds absurd. That is what a makeup deal is. You are not allowed to quit if you are down. And it's generally thought to be very unethical if you quit. The only way you can essentially quit is if you stop playing poker. And some people have tried to do this where they say, all right, I'm quitting poker. Then they quit for 6 months and they decide to come back. Well, I hate to break it to you, but your makeup deal is still on. You'll find that expenses or a salary may be added to the makeup if you are a good player or if you're just like stuck infinite and they want you to keep playing and being motivated. So let's say you're down $100,000. The backer may agree to give you $5,000 in cash that just goes on the makeup, which is fine. Also, sometimes you'll find that things like a loan can be added to the makeup at 2 times makeup. So let's say the backer wanted to give you a loan. A way to fairly do that is to just add that amount times 2 to the makeup. This is usually the case when you are what's referred to as buried, when you're down a ton. Full disclosure, I've been in a makeup deal one time, and I was down at most $400,000. And it gets demoralizing. They call it the makeup hellhole. And it's pretty true. Because whatever tournament I play, I basically am not going to get any money from this. And you have to realize it takes a very strong mindset for someone to get in there and play and come back from it like I did. And I think a lot of people are not built for that. I think a lot of people think I'm down 400K. Well, I might as well shoot for the moon and try to get rich. But I did it a slow way. I was like, 100,000 cash, lose a little bit, 100,000 cash, lose a little bit. It's a slow slog. And you need basically the perfect backee to make a makeup deal with them long term, especially if you're talking about big dollar amounts, because some people lose their minds when they get down a lot, whereas other people who have, been around the block a few times, who are very strong mentally, they can handle it. But it really does take a special person to do a long-term deal. And I would definitely suggest that if you are going to be buying action in people, you probably just want to go the markup route, and just make sure you're not paying high markups. It's very important when you're buying action of people. Realize you do not have to pay the amount they are asking for. It is a negotiation. But anyway, yeah, makeup deals. I would literally never offer anyone a makeup deal, because it's just terrible whenever you're down for them, and whenever they're down, it's also kind of terrible for you. And very often people do just get stuck and lose their minds. All this said, you do not need backing. So many players come to me and say, all right, what do I need to do to get a backing deal? But you don't need to get backing. Poker is a great way to get rich slowly. A lot of people have in their minds, if I could just play this one event, like the World Series main event, and prove myself, then I would show everybody how good I am. But that thought process is obviously incredibly flawed, because there is infinite variance in poker tournaments. And in general, your bankroll is a relatively clear indicator of your skill level. You may say, well, I had a big bankroll, but then I had a terrible medical expense that took away all of it. Well, that kind of thing may happen, and that is reasonable. That actually is an instance where maybe you do need to get backed. But if you are a good poker player, you don't want to be giving some percentage of your profits to other people. You would much rather hold on to that yourself. The main time it does make sense to get backed, however, is when incredibly soft events exist that you are adequately skilled to beat, but the buy-in amount is much higher than your usual buy-in. This pretty much only occurs in the high-stakes games, which is why you hear a lot of the high-stakes poker community talking about swapping action, where I'll give you 5% of me, I give you 5% of me, I get 5% of you, or a lot of people selling out 90% of themselves in $100,000 buy-in tournaments, because realistically, if you are a good poker player and you're putting in adequate volume, you can get a hold of a few $100,000. It's just a matter of getting in there and grinding it out. But it's pretty hard to get a hold of $10 million or $20 million that you need to be playing $100,000 buy-in tournaments. So that is the point where backing usually does start to make a whole lot of sense. But people who are looking to get backed in random $200 buy-in tournaments or $300 buy-in tournaments, they either have some sort of significant life leak, maybe gambling, drinking, partying, whatever, or they're just not all that good at poker. And I think most people who are actively looking to be backed all the time usually just aren't that great. There are some times where it makes some sense, but usually that's not going to be the case. Some people may say, I just always want to play as high as I can possibly can. So if I can get backed for something, I'm going to play it. Maybe that's true. But please realize that you don't actually need to be backed. And sure, some good things come from being able to get more experience in higher stakes games and whatnot, but you're usually just better off playing with all of your action, experiencing the stress that goes along with that, and then also keeping all of your profits. And if you're sitting there playing with an edge, you'd rather keep all of your money than give it to somebody else.